You know, every now and then a court case pops up that's, well, it's way more than just a legal fight. It's like you're getting a peek right into the heart of a relationship. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. It's a case out of an Israeli rabbinical court, and it's a wild story about marriage, kids, and what it costs, literally, to say no. Okay, so check this out. 72,000 Israeli shekels. That is the exact amount a court told a man he had to pay his wife. And I know what you're thinking. Alimony, right? Or maybe child support? Nope, not even close. The reason for this huge payment, it gets right to the core of why they even got married to begin with. So that really brings us to the big question here, doesn't it? What is the price of saying no? I mean, in a marriage that's tied up with religious law, what's the actual dollars and cents cost when you refuse to go along with one of the most basic expectations? Let's get into it and see what the court had to say. It's pretty surprising. All right, so let's start with part one. And we're actually going to jump right to the end of the story here. We're starting with the verdict. Why? Because it's so wild, it really sets the stage for everything that came before it. So, the court's decision was crystal clear. This marriage is over. But then they dropped the bombshell. They ordered the husband to cough up that huge sum of money. See, this wasn't just about them going their separate ways. It was about putting a price tag on what happened. Which brings us to the big question. Why? What did he do? And here it is. This was the absolute core of the whole thing. The court decided that because the husband just kept refusing to have more kids, that was what wrecked the marriage. And that's why he had to get divorced and pay up. I mean, think about it. This isn't your typical divorce case about cheating or something like that. This was a fundamental disagreement about what their marriage was even for. Okay, so to really get how they ended up in this mess, we've got to rewind. Let's take a look at the couple and the conflict that completely blew up their marriage. So at first glance, their story sounds pretty normal, right? They've been married for a few years, they had one kid together, and eventually the wife filed for divorce. Simple enough. But underneath that surface, oh man, there was this huge gap between them that they just could not cross. And this is where you really see the two clashing worlds they were living in. On her side, she had this deep, deep desire to be an Em Habanim. That's Hebrew for joyful mother of children. For her, it was a huge part of who she was. And him? Well, he saw more kids as, and this is a direct quote from the court documents, a nuisance and an unnecessary financial burden. I mean, you can't get much further apart than that. So when she testified in court, she laid out this incredibly personal and, frankly, painful story. She said that after she got her IUD taken out so they could try for another baby, her husband started, actively avoiding being intimate with her. And she even claimed he took physical steps to make sure she wouldn't get pregnant, which is a big deal in Jewish law. It's called wasting of seed. She told the court she just felt humiliated and hurt by all of it. But, of course, there are always two sides to a story. So the husband, he had his own defense. And on the face of it, it sounded like maybe, just maybe, they could fix things. But the real question was, did he actually mean it? So the husband's argument was all about wanting shalom bayit. That's a really important concept in Judaism that basically means peace in the home. He told the court that, look, even though he had his doubts, he eventually gave in and agreed to have another kid because he wanted to save the marriage. And that's the million-dollar question, right? He said yes, he agreed. So why on earth did the court still grant the divorce and slap him with that fine? Why wasn't his yes good enough? Okay, so now let's get into the court's ruling itself. This is where things get really fascinating because the judges went way beyond just the basic facts. They started digging into the husband's character and what they thought his real motives were. Yeah, the court just wasn't buying it. Not for a second. They saw his last-minute agreement for what they believed it was. A strategic move, a way to get out of the divorce and avoid paying that money. As far as they were concerned, it was just too little, too late. They flat out said it wasn't sincere. And this next part, this quote, it's really the heart of their entire decision. The judges basically said, sure, he wants his wife, but not to build a family with her. He wants her around to fulfill his personal needs. They decided his wanting to stay married had nothing to do with their shared duties as a couple. I mean, wow, that is a pretty brutal assessment. The court was basically saying this guy just doesn't get it. He doesn't understand the absolute essence of what a marriage is supposed to be under Jewish law. A partnership where building a family together is right at the center of everything. And that led the court to establish a really powerful idea here. They said that any marriage where one person is actively stopping the other from having children is it's broken from the start.
They believed a marriage like that could never last and was, in their words, doomed to failure.
So this probably has you wondering, wait a minute, how can a religious court order a financial payment that's actually, legally enforceable? Well, the answer is in the very unique way that marriage law works in this system. The whole thing comes down to this one document, the ketubah. Now, if you've been to a traditional Jewish wedding, you've seen one. It's signed right there under the chuppah. And a lot of people think it's just this beautiful, symbolic certificate, but let me tell you, it is so much more than that. And here's the crucial part. The ketubah is like a 2-for-1 deal. First, yes, it's symbolic. It lists out the husband's obligations to his wife. But, and this is the key, it's also a legally binding financial contract. That number written on it, the 72,000 shekels in this case, that's not just for show. It's a real debt. And it becomes payable if the court decides the husband has broken the terms of the contract. And that's what ties this whole story together. That famous line, be fruitful and multiply. In this legal world, that's not just a nice idea or a spiritual suggestion. It's considered a core, foundational part of the marriage contract. So when the husband refused to have more kids, the court said, that's it. You've broken the very essence of the ketubah you signed on your wedding day. So in the end, the court's final order was, well, it was almost poetic. They basically said, you two have to go your separate ways. The husband must grant her the religious divorce, the get, so she can be free to go build the family she's always wanted. And as for him, well, he's free to go live his life without what he saw as the burden of more children. And really, this whole case leaves us with a huge question, one that goes way beyond this one couple, right? In any serious relationship, especially one that's built on tradition and law, where's the line? Where does your personal choice end and your duty to the partnership begin? It's a tough, complex question. And as this story shows, figuring out where that line is can have some very real, very personal, and very expensive consequences.